As most of you know, I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. In fact, it's literally my most favorite franchise ever. I love it so much that I'm actually making a series of long-form retrospectives on each game in the series. This video is not going to be part of those retrospectives, as I'm trying to do those in order of release. And considering that the game just came out, it's going to be a while till we get there. Now, this is going to be a simple review of the Resident Evil 3 Remake, focusing on a general critique of its gameplays and features while not going too in-depth and keeping it mostly spoiler-free, trying to keep it to what I've only seen in promotional material and the early playtime. So I'm going to be forcing myself to not talk about the intricate details until I actually get to it in the retrospective. And man, that's going to be hard because there is a lot to talk about. To begin, Resident Evil 3 Remake is a reinterpretation of the 1999 game of the same name on the PlayStation. Despite colloquially being named a remake, like the Resident Evil 2 Remake last year, it needs to be made clear that this is not really an accurate recreation of the original, and that really needs to be stressed. I am a huge fan of classic Resident Evil games, and I was excited for my boy Nemesis to be updated to the modern era, but this game deviates so far from the source material that going into it with such expectations is just asking for disappointment. Several areas, enemies, iconic moments have all been outright removed, and characters have been altered so much that they're basically unrecognizable. Jill is set up with this clear PTSD about the events of Resident Evil 1, and this is reincorporated later in the game, but it has no significance or conclusion. Carlos used to be a very charismatic character with his Hispanic accent. Him and Jill began in a fairly dysfunctional relationship.
Our mission is to rescue the civilians.
How kind of you. Considering Umbrella caused all this in the first place, those liars!
But then slowly, over the course of the game, the two began to rely on each other more and more due to the circumstances. In the remake, Carlos and Jill seem already like they're a pretty good team. So their character development throughout the game is that in the beginning they work together pretty well, and by the end they work together a little better. Compelling stuff. Not to say that either character had a very strong personality before, but now Carlos's character is kind of just telling jokes.
But it's no zombie. It knows what it wants and won't stop till it gets it. Don't you like that in a man?
No thanks. He's all yours.
In fact, that's kinda Jill's character too. Constantly giving off one-liners and jokes that just oversaturate the game.
Guaranteed to give you a headache.
Even Leon in Resident Evil 2 Remake didn't even quip this much, and he turns into this.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Sometimes these changes from the original are better, sometimes they're worse, but the point is to lower expectations if you're a superfan. There seems to be this general consensus from other reviewers online about the game that it's good, except it's not a good remake. And no, this game doesn't stand up on its own either. On its own, it's kind of mediocre at best, but as a remake, it's absolutely terrible. So we're just getting that out of the way right now. I'm judging this as its own thing, not as a remake, even though I love the original. And actually, if you're a fan of the Resident Evil 2 remake, you should probably keep your expectations pretty low too. Some things have been positively transferred over, like Capcom's RE engine, which has been getting a lot of use lately and looks great for realistic environments. However, the core gameplay features were altered despite the game basically carrying over the same mechanics from Resident Evil 2. A notable one being the gore damage system. Before, when you damaged body parts, you could visibly see the damage being caused on the bodies of the zombies, as they're slowly stripped away piece by piece, along with consistent damage leading to stuns or even dismemberment. Now the gore is toned down, and dismemberment happens mostly by these random critical hits. This pretty much changes everything about the game and how it's played, leading to a more run-and-gun gameplay style where the player takes less time choosing where they want to shoot and instead just blasting everything away. This seems to make it closer to something like Resident Evil 4, even bringing back the destructible boxes carrying ammo. The only thing it's missing is enemies dropping health and ammunition whenever you kill them. Sure, in Resident Evil 4, a majority of the enemies that you fought were the regular Ganados, but the Ganado could do basic attacks. They could throw their weapons at you, they could hurl dynamite, they had a variety of attack types, and they only grew from there. In Resident Evil 3, zombies just shamble towards you and then grab you. Sometimes the zombies have parasites on their head that let them attack you from far away. That's about it, which is fine whenever they're just supposed to be bulky obstacles that whittle down your inventory, but in an action game context, they're just not interesting. The game is constantly at odds with the survival horror part of its design. Unlike Resident Evil 4, there isn't enough variety in enemies or enemy behavior to make battling against them an engaging experience. The game also seems to encourage closer combat with the new perfect dodge mechanic that for some reason was one of the few unique things that was carried over from the original. Press dodge at the right time and you'll cleanly escape attacks, and you'll even get a bit of slow-mo for precision shots. Or in Carlos's case, you get this sick punch. Yeah, it's a bit easy to abuse at times. What I found weird though was this unusually long period that takes place between Carlos's actions. Look, okay, so here I am mashing the dodge button. There's a good like 2 or so seconds of cooldown right after the animation is stopped. That feels like way too much time, and for the enemies he has to deal with, it can lead to very cheap deaths. But the biggest problem with this dodge mechanic is just that it isn't translated into a proper gameplay mode for it to exist. Okay, so in the original, it worked because the cameras are fixed, and you could see enemies coming at you from any angle. In other games that have a similar last-second counter move like Fury or the Souls games, the camera is far away from the character and offers a large view of the world around them. In Resident Evil 3, the camera is stuck up Jill's ass. Not as bad as some games, mind you, but, you know, it's less than optimal. So predicting an oncoming dodge is messy without losing sight of where you're headed or what is ahead of you. Out of all the things that could be translated into the new game, why did they lean so heavily into this? In the Resident Evil 2 remake, you were able to use grenades and flashbangs as a sort of defensive move, adding to the strategy of how you choose to use your limited inventory. Adding a bit more leniency to the very punishing zombie bites. But that's gone now. There goes that layer of strategy. You used to be able to combine your blue herbs with your green and red ones, adding a defensive boost to use whenever you choose to do so. But the poison status condition is gone now, so I guess blue herbs are too. And along with them, the defensive boost. Also, they got rid of the very clear damage indicator whenever you take a hit. Now whenever you take damage, the only thing that changes is the character's animation. Whenever you reach danger, the screen's colors get a little muted. It's actually kind of hard to see at times. I can only assume that this change was made for some sort of realism, because it isn't very realistic to see the words caution flash on your eyeballs whenever you take damage. Realistic or not though, it was a lot more convenient, and I would prefer it to have been in this game too. I'm just not sure what exactly this game is trying to pull off. Gone is the subtlety of intensive item management. This game even has an honest-to-God wave defense section. Clearly, as an action horror title, it is leaning more on the action side of things. In fact, the puzzles that define the Resident Evil franchise, mostly, are practically non-existent. I think that there were maybe 2 puzzles in the entire game, at least 2 that were required for story progression. There are still those basic grab an item and then take it to another place to get another item, but even those are incredibly simplified. Other times it's just complete an objective without taking too much damage. There is a bit of exploration when you're not just being funneled down a straight linear path, specifically in the beginning street area. But most of your upgrades and ammunition that you find are just going to be handed to you. Often you just get an item that opens up every lock that you previously couldn't open. A simple one solution for every problem. I love being rewarded for nothing. Oh look, a gun part. I sure have earned that by playing the game up until this point. So fine, you want to be an action game? Be an action game. I like action, I like Resident Evil 4, I like Resident Evil 5, I kinda like Resident Evil 6. But if you're gonna do that, why are you still hanging on to these survival horror elements? I'm getting the jack of all trades and master of none here. The maps of the game seem extremely fast-paced. Most areas are completed just when you feel like they should be opening up to bigger and better things. Nothing matches the size or intricacy of the beginning police station in Resident Evil 2, including the map from Resident Evil 2. They just copy over the original map with the exact same puzzles and solutions. To make things worse, we learn like basically nothing during this entire segment. Yeah, I know that the original Resident Evil 3 also went back to the police station and used the exact same map. It kinda sucked then too, but at least it was short and we were gathering important resources for the main character that we play as. And there were also interesting encounters. Remember when Nemesis blew through the wall? You know what we get in this game? We get an explanation why there was a fucking dead body in a locker. Because apparently he was infected and he stuck himself in there. Fucking exhilarating. I'm glad I learned that. The number of files in the beginning area feels like it's been tripled. These files are coming at you non-stop at the beginning of this game. They just don't stop. And I get it, Resident Evil has a lot of files, but they have never been this packed together. And no, they're not optional. If you played a Resident Evil game, then you know that you need to be reading these papers in order to get hints for puzzles or maybe defeating enemies. And to make things worse, these notes are just written terribly in the context of the game. Like this guy just had a bug monster shove maggots down his throat. Then apparently he immediately remembered a saying his grandmother said to him about eating green herbs. And this random thought actually works out for him and causes him to throw up the worms. Upon surviving this horrifying encounter, he then decided to write his experience down and leave it nearby for random people to read. All this just to explain how to treat a new status condition? You couldn't figure out a better way to do that? Need another example? Okay, here is this scientist lovingly writing down her feelings about her new horrifying monster creation. She blatantly says that they are susceptible to heat and that they expose their delicate mandibles, which is just so on the nose. Why couldn't they say something like, well, so what if you're a little flammable or a bit squishy on the inside? You know, something with any kind of subtlety or something that sounds natural? How about one more? We find a paper from an angry citizen talking about a dangerously loose giant head on a toy store, obviously setting it up for something. Then Carlos calls us on the radio and he says, hey, I got a plan. Come over here. So you got these two things. You got the note and you got Carlos. Put them together. Okay, Carlos is probably gonna shoot the head and it's gonna explode and it's gonna open a door or it's gonna land on Nemesis or something, you know, something useful. Oh, it's just blown up by somebody else. And it's an instant death obstacle that I wasn't expecting to have to run from. Why does it look like that? Why is it so badly animated? Why did this need to be set up? Why was this even explained to us? Just blow it up. Why did you need a setup saying that it was loose? I would believe that a rocket would just knock it off of whatever it's sitting on. It didn't need to be loose in order to do that. It's just... duh. Look, Resident Evil has a lot of files whose existence don't make a lot of sense in context, but it was never this bad before. Everything doesn't need to be explained to us. I don't need to know why this lockpick is in a box. Just give me the lockpick. Ugh. Many enemy encounters are subjugated to very specific and short areas, as blink and you'll miss them challenges, with little to no mix and matching for a variety in the combat. Then the new interpretation of hunters are introduced around the midpoint, and they are the first significantly different enemy that is mixed together with zombies. In previous Resident Evil games, the hunters have had this pounce move that insta-kills you from any health amount. It was pretty unforgiving, but it happened infrequently, so it wasn't that huge of a problem. Here, they have carried over that move, except it's one of their favorite attacks and they use it all the time. Missing a perfect dodge, even once, can land you on the death screen, and it is so fucking annoying. And this demand for perfection kind of applies to another large enemy. This is where we need to talk about the titular character from the original game, Nemesis, my favorite character in possibly anything. I love Nemesis. I love him so much. In the original Resident Evil 3, Nemesis would constantly be hunting you down in specific areas around the town, and you never knew where he was going to show up next. He was a huge threat, and it took a pretty good amount of effort to avoid and even more to fight. Then, moving all the way to the Resident Evil 2 remake, Mr. X was introduced as an aggressive block that constantly roamed the police station and had to be considered when planning any route or engaging with enemies. Both of these scenarios were incredibly memorable, and players anxiously waited for how Resident Evil 3 would handle the creature. The outcome we all expected was how Mr. X was done, except with a larger array of moves and more aggression. Well, that certainly is what Nemesis is in the remake, except he has one huge problem. He is heavily limited on where he can go. He can't go inside most buildings, and he doesn't follow you for most of the game. And a good portion of the areas in which he does chase you are scripted running sections where there's no actual threat of death, so long as you just hold up on the control stick. His aggression levels are off the chart too. In fact, his behavior doesn't match up with the slow gameplay. In Resident Evil 2, when Mr. X hit you, he would just stand there for a second as a cooldown period, let you recover from your mistake. But Nemesis, he just keeps on attacking, keeps pulling you back. He does this so frequently that he has even stun-locked me a couple times and killed me before I could even respond. There's no room for mistake with this guy. He is just too punishing for this slow gameplay. Nemesis is incredibly underutilized, but that doesn't mean that he is completely ruined in the remake. He carries over the over-the-top tone that Resident Evil is known for, and a good chunk of the things that he does are absolutely incredible in a campy sort of way. And his evolution as the game progresses, I feel, is a pretty good matchup with the original's interpretation. Note that I said good matchup, not a good replacement. Both the original Resident Evil 3 and the remake offer something unique about Nemesis. So while new Nemesis isn't just old Nemesis but better, he's still pretty good on his own. It's just such a shame that he couldn't meet his full potential. I mean, there's glimpses of it, but it's just not fully realized. The final big contender for this game's greatest downfall is the length of its content. Lots of controversy about that before this game came out. The original had the Mercenaries mode after completing the game, but the remake is released with basically no new game modes. Now, this is especially problematic because the game's length was about 5 hours. Now, when compared to other Resident Evil games, that's not that bad. Resident Evil 1 could be beaten at about 7 hours, the Resident Evil 2 remake in about 8, and the original Resident Evil 3 in about 6. But the catch is that all of those games had some sort of, variety when it came to their replayability. Resident Evil 1 and 2 had alternate story modes where you could play as different characters with different weapons, and the original Resident Evil 3 had its playthrough be somewhat randomized. The most that the Resident Evil 3 remake has is shifted around items at a harder difficulty. That's not as bad as some people are making it out. That does offer some replayability, but I don't know if it's enough, especially if you're not interested in replaying it. And with all the previous problems mentioned, I wouldn't blame you if you aren't. The alternate modes for this game have clearly been replaced by the new multiplayer game, Resistance, which was bundled with the Resident Evil 3 remake. Because Resident Evil has a great history when it comes to online competitive multiplayer games. Really, it depends on what you get out of that game alone, but as someone who really isn't a fan of competitive games, I definitely don't appreciate it. Also, as a competitive game, it's entirely dependent on its player base, something that's already kind of beginning to dwindle. I'm willing to bet that in a year or so, this game mode will be probably dead entirely. It's a very messy situation, and I think Capcom's in a pretty rough spot if they thought that they were going to be able to split up the Resident Evil community between the people who want to play single-player games and the people who want a competitive core experience. Since it is technically a different game, I'm not including it in this review of Resident Evil 3. If you want a simple review like this on Resistance, let me know in the comments. I'll do it if there's enough requests. Until then, I'm going to be getting as much footage of this as I can for the retrospective, before it goes belly up. So the game isn't a very accurate remake to the original, losing a lot of the stuff that made it unique and memorable and gave us a chopped up, shorter version with less content than both the original and most games that came before it, including the similarly developed Resident Evil 2 remake. On its own, it's a confused action survival horror with boring characters, underutilized enemies, environments, poor writing, and small playtime. Look, I know I'm being super critical on this game, but it's only because I care. I seriously love Resident Evil more than any other game franchise, and as a fanboy, I was looking forward to this game ever since it was announced. If anyone was prepared to love this game unconditionally, it would be me. Not to say that I entirely hate it. Even now, as I say these words, I'm kind of thinking about going back through the game and trying to figure out everything that I missed. It isn't the worst Resident Evil game. It's not even close. In fact, it isn't even technically bad. It has several moments of genuine thrills and excitement, along with some really great monster designs, but it just isn't enough to make up for all of its shortcomings. I'm giving the Resident Evil 3 remake a 5 out of 10. The worst part about this isn't that it isn't great, but that there was so much potential that was squandered, and we likely won't get another shot to make my favorite character ever, Nemesis, the forefront of gaming news again. Of course, there are a lot more problems with the game that I'm forcing myself to hold back on. I'll talk about it in depth in my Resident Evil Retrospective series once we get to it, in order to explain the game's pros and cons in depth without fears of spoilers. Maybe my opinion will change by then, maybe I'll like it more, maybe I'll hate it more, I don't know. Until then, tell me what you thought about the game. Apparently there's fairly heavy discourse surrounding it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.